Hi, my friends. How are you? It is Sunday night. It is a happy Valentine's Day. I mean, if you've got a love in your life, I'm hoping you're not even watching this, so you're just cuddled up somewhere and really enjoying each other as if you haven't been able to do that for the last 11 months in this pandemic, that you've really just slowed down your life right now. I wanted to share today, as crazy as this sounds, on Valentine's Day, but just this idea of how do we deal with disappointment. And maybe today is a great day to do it. I bet you, I remember being in a relationship for many years and being disappointed. And a lot of it is because I recognize now that I wasn't really clear with my expectations. And I think for many of us, that's where disappointment stems from. When we have an expectation of something and a reality of something. And the expectation of what we want to have happen is here, and the reality is here. And the points in between is our suffering. It is our disappointment. So when we're thinking about how do we deal with disappointment, one of the first things I would have you encourage you to think about is, how do you come back to the land of reality? How do you let go of expectations and deal with the reality of what is happening for us right now? And let's be real, there are so many areas of our life that we could be disappointed. Oh my gosh, we're in this pandemic, disappointment. We're living and working from home, disappointment. We've got a whole political scene that seems crazy to me, disappointment. We got people, in a pandemic situation, maybe not showing up the way they want to or we want to, disappointment. And so all of this for us, I think, is really important for us to come up to and realize what are our expectations. And oftentimes we don't even express what our expectations are. And then we expect people to read our minds to know that they should be acting or treating us better without it ever being really clear on what we expected in the first place. There's a couple of ways of how people react and they set up their lives. There's people who try and avoid disappointment throughout their life. They're underachievers. They set the bar low. They live in a state of self-preservation. I still remember doing a workshop. This was several years ago at a biotech company. And it was all about, how do you take people from good to great? So it was around the idea of coaching. And there was someone in the room, this gentleman in the room, who I remember so distinctly not really engaging with the material and feeling kind of stressed about it. And after the class, he came up to me and he, in such earnest, he said, "What if you don't want to be great?" Yeah. What if you don't want to be? And I said, "Well, is there anything in your life that you'd like to be great at? Is there anything that you're passionate about?" And he thought for a moment. He goes, "Maybe surfing." And I said, "Would you ever want to put the work in that requires you to be, pretty great at surfing?" He was like, "No." And, I think there's a bit of self-preservation in that, because to be great at something requires risk. It requires a willingness to not be great for a while and to actually be terrible at it and to, to underachieve. And there's going to be times of disappointment for sure in trying to go after things that you're not great at, because in your head, you have this image or this imagination of what it's going to be like. But in reality, you're kind of terrible at it in the beginning. And so you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. So one way to cope, to avoid disappointment, is to underachieve. And another way to cope is to super overachieve. And we try to be perfectionists and we work ourselves to the bone to try to get things right so that we can control our disappointment and not experience it, because we're so great at what we do. Unfortunately, you can already imagine what happens in that state when we overachieve we're setting ourselves up for constant disappointment because we can never actually stay at that level constantly. And if we're expecting that of ourselves, how much are we expecting of other people who are going to continually disappoint us as well? So I just wanted to talk to you about some coping strategies. And, in my own disappointment, I don't know what I would call it in 2021. I'm sorry, in 2020. I don't know. I guess it is a bit of a disappointment. At the end of 2019, I found my birth mother. And in 2020, I wrote her a letter. And it was a really impactful letter, at least I felt, one that acknowledged the pain that she must have gone through in making that decision and the deep, deep gratitude I had for her to make the decision that I don't know if I was in the same shoes I would have been able to make of having a child and having to give it up. And I sent that letter, of course, wanting a response. And it'll be over a year in March. I think I sent it February or March. I sent it, and there's been no response. And I don't know that there ever will be. There's certainly disappointment in that. But my intention for writing that letter to begin with was really to just express gratitude, to put out into the world a deep well of appreciation for making a decision that brought me life. And I've often thought about it in this time of pandemic and, what it might have felt like to receive a letter like that. I think when we deal with disappointment, the reality is I don't know where she's at. I don't know what kind of mental state she's in or what she's dealing with. All I can know is I didn't hear anything back. And all I can know for sure is I wrote a letter from a deep, heartfelt place. That's the reality of it. Everything else is out of my control. When we get a disappointment, the story that we tell about that disappointment creates more and more of our experience. I think when we have a deep disappointment, it is really easy to go into victim mode. Really easy to go into, well, this is what happened to me. This is how I was treated. This is what went wrong for me. And in that state, what we miss are the huge potential gifts that arise with disappointment. There's a term called post-traumatic growth, that when we have great trauma, after we have moved through it, if we're willing to take a look at it and see what the gifts are from that trauma. And it's not easy work because most of us want to stay, and as crazy as it sounds, we want to stay in that trauma state where we're the victim, where we are holding on to the idea that someone did something to us. But that idea of actually growing through our trauma is the thing that actually makes us stronger and builds more resilience for us. And the story that we tell about the trauma. And I'm so intrigued more and more about the stories that we tell about ourselves, to ourselves, and to everybody else. That really does create our experience. And the more and more people that I talk to who are telling me about experience that they had years ago, and they're still continuing to suffer over, just breaks my heart. Because all they're doing is retelling a story from a perspective of I'm the victim versus I am the hero. When you've gone through disappointment, you've experienced deep hurt, and you've had expectations that were here, but the reality was here. And in between all of this is your suffering. When you take a look at that, can you see that story in another light? Is there any way else for you to tell that story where you get to take back the control of it and you get to own it? dealing with your disappointment is a challenge. And you can go in and you can problem solve and solve it right away, but you still might be left with the emotional coping. And working with a coach often helps you deal with the emotional coping as well as putting some strategies together. And one of the things of just looking at for yourself, breaking down the story that you're telling about this disappointment, knowing that there's truly a limitless way you can tell this story. And is there any other way you could tell this story that would put the power of it back in your hands? All right, my friends, that's Sunday night. I hope you're having a great night wherever you are. Happy Valentine's Day. And I'll be back every Sunday. I'm here. I'll talk to you later. Bye.